Hello, everybody. I'm Ron Miscavige, and this is Life After Scientology, and welcome to our show. Today, I have a very special guest on, an old friend of mine, and we're going to talk about a subject that I don't know if it's been talked about at all, or if any, maybe just briefly. But this person is totally familiar with it because he was involved in what we're going to talk about in a very intense manner, I should say. Before we get started, though, let me remind you, if you're not a subscriber, could you please subscribe? And when you do that, touch that bell up there so when I do future shows, you'll be notified. And of course, any of you out there who'd like to contribute to the ongoingness of this show, you can become a patron and just be going, boy, I got to get my words out today. Let me have a little drink of water. Hey, there you go. Good morning. Na zdrowie. And that is not gin, that's just water. If you'd like to contribute to the ongoingness, and I don't know if that word exists, but I made it up a long time ago, so I love it. If you want to contribute to the ongoingness of the show, you can become a Patreon. Okay, so the business out of the way, and good morning, Dan. Dan is a dear friend of mine for many years. He's the co-writer of our book called Rootless, and good morning.
Hey, thanks, Ron. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, believe me, it's my pleasure. And what we're going to talk about today is the making of Scientology's technical training films. Okay? Now, to start off with, this is not a puff piece on Scientology, but this was an integral part of the actual promotion of Scientology to teach people about auditing techniques. Well, wait, I'm not going to get into it. I got you on to talk about it. So let's start out with this. Dan, could you explain what are technical training films? What exactly are they?
Yeah. Okay, Ron. What they were meant to do was to teach people the various protocols of auditing, meaning the training routines and the how the e-meter worked and what the e-meter reads were and what the auditor's code was and how to do confessionals and various. There was like I think about 26 technical training films that were produced. I don't know if they're all produced now, but that project started in early 1978. When I first met LRH, he came down and gave us several lectures about what he expected us to do.
Wait, Dan, before you say when you met him, where were you when this took place? And you just tell us how you got to that place where you'd be standing in front of L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah, I had joined the Sea Organization, which is sort of like the cardinals in Rome, under the Vatican. Right. And I had joined the Sea Organization along with a bunch of friends and my then wife and so on. And we all came to this place out in the desert called Winter Headquarters. It was down in La Quinta, California, near Palm Springs. And it was hotter than hell. It was like I'd never been so hot in my entire life. It was miserable. So, my wife and I were doing our orientation. And one day we just happened to run into LRH. He was out there taking a walk with his messengers and so on. And he had long red hair. He had a Colonel Sanders goatee, big mutton chop sideburns. And he basically looked like a gentleman rancher. That was sort of this image he had created of himself, just I guess to stay out of the limelight and so on. But he looked completely different than any picture I've ever seen of LRH before. He looked long red hair and this goatee and everything. Well, about 3 weeks later, the FBI raided the church in D.C. and they also raided Big Blue out in Los Angeles. And right then, LRH split. And this was July of 1977. And then when he came back in the beginning of 1978, I think he came back New Year's Day or the 2nd of January, New Year's 1978.
Right.
he had written a bunch of technical training film scripts, and he wanted to get right into making these technical training films. So we started a bunch of what he called "Get Your Feet Wet," which was just basically to get the crew who was familiar with how to make a motion picture. Basically, we shot them on video cameras, and then they had film cameras when we actually started making the movies. But so we did several of those, and that's all seemed to be going okay. And then we started the first film, which was called the Professional TR Course.
Right.
And that was the film that I actually played the lead character in. So that's how I got my introduction to these technical training films. And it was most of the crew were short of sleep and everything like that. But if I didn't get enough sleep, my eyes got red, so I always got to sleep at night. So that was great for me.
So, in other words, these abusive techniques of trying to get people to produce higher and higher amount of product were even in its inception in those days. People were short of sleep. In other words, this is a harbinger of worse things to come. Right? You could say that. I mean, look, built into the DNA was failure, as far as I'm concerned, that it came to. But I think there was some real value in learning how to communicate properly, because that was the first course I did in Scientology, and I felt that I benefited from it. And I know you and Waldo, that's who played your counterpart in it, you demonstrated the correct technique of communication. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. We did. Yeah, the whole film was based on. I played a field auditor who was failing. He was doing terrible with all his pre-clears and so on, and so he gets called into a qual division TR's course.
Now, you get to explain what qual means, Dan.
Okay, qualifications is the division of the organization that has to do with correction and certification and so on, and that's sort of what the qualifications division is. So he gets called into this TR's course, special TR's course for field auditors, and all the other people in the class are field auditors and so on, because we've been messing up and we're ruining the reputation of Scientology in the field and so on. And so what the whole film revolves around how my twin Waldo, Bob Waldman, who's still at the base as far as I know, we go through each of the training routines along with the whole rest of the class, but they sort of focus on us.
Right.
So we go to this, the first drill is OTTR0, which is operating Thetan TR0, and that's when you sit there with your eyes closed. And then there's TR0, where you have your eyes open, and then there's TR0 bull bait, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so on. And that's basically all the course is. And it shows at the beginning how I was doing terrible and chopping up my PCs and getting terrible results on them. And then they put me through the course. And then at the end of the film, I audit the PCs again, and then everything is wonderful and everything is brilliant and everything is a complete success.
Now, who were some of the people that were on the set with you? And do you know what they're doing now? Could you just kind of do a little reprise on that?
Some of the people on the set.
Well, wasn't Gary Weese on that?
Yeah, Gary Weese played the executive director of the organization. Rich Cohen played the qualsec of the organization. Robbie Robinson was the course supervisor.
Oh, okay, let me ask something. Do you know where these people are now? Like, how about Robbie Robinson? What's his status now?
I think he passed away not too long ago from cancer. That's what I've heard, and I hope that's not the case, but that's what I've heard. Gary Weese, as far as I know, is still there, locked up at the base. Rich Cohen ended up in Los Angeles at the AOLA in Los Angeles, and I have no idea what he's up to. There's a guy named David Wilson who played sort of a kind of a prissy Englishman type character, and he's, as far as I know, he's still very supportive of Scientology. He's out of the Sea Org, and he's still doing stuff, with
Yeah.
Scientology.
Oh, okay. I was just curious because I know that some of the people did leave and some people stayed with it. Now, but
Yeah.
my question is this: how was it working with L. Ron Hubbard? What was that experience like?
Well, for me, it was great because I always got to sleep at night. On the other hand, for a lot of the crew, because everyone was sort of new and fumbly and this and that, there was times when he would just hit the roof and go nuclear, and he would just yell and scream and demand and demand that things be put right and so on. But once things eventually became right, he actually completely settled down. He had sort of this default level of awareness that I would call sort of an amused serenity, and that was sort of his default tone level, if you want to call it that way. That's his emotional state. But when he was mad, he could just hit the roof and just scream bloody murder and so on. And in fact, one time there was a new guy who came in who had just arrived to the base, and he had been walked down to the studio to see where we were shooting. And he walked in, and the things were just a complete madhouse. The LRH was yelling, and he was demanding this, that, and the other thing go on. And this guy stood there inside the door, just completely slack-jawed. LRH noticed that, and he came over and said, he shook his hand and said, "Hi, welcome aboard. Don't worry, it's always like this around here." And it certainly became that later on, for sure.
Well, this is I don't know how to approach this, but do you think now was David on that set? Did he take part in this?
Yeah, David at the time, he was like a
We're talking about David Miscavige. This is
yeah,
my son.
your
Okay.
son, yeah. He was like the video cameraman. He was the video cameraman, and Mark Yeager was the video machine operator. And Terry Gillum was or Terry Armstrong at the time. She was the cameraman, along with a guy named Don Bateman. So these were crew members who weren't as part of the actors in the scene, but they were the crew members that were sort of uh, getting everything set up and shot.
Well, do you think just possibly that David used L. Ron Hubbard's ranting and going nuts on this set as kind of his modus of operandi for later on? I don't know. I mean, I've thought about this, and what do you think?
Well, I think LRH would blow up before, when he was like, David arrived there several months before I did. So he was probably pretty familiar with LRH as in his moods and actions and so on. And then when he got onto the film set, yeah, and we started making films, I'm sure he learned a lot from LRH about how to control people and how to manipulate them and how to get what you want done and so on. But it was like it was it was horrific. It was
Yeah.
really horrific, except like I say, because my eyes would get red if I didn't get enough sleep, so I always got to sleep, and it was fantastic. Now, one other example. One day, we had a makeup shed and a costume shed that were outside the studio, and he came in one day, and he wanted to run me through my lines for the next scene. We were going to do a scene where I was supposed to audit someone uh, on an engram that they'd suffered. And so at the time, the procedure was R3R, meaning routine 3 revise, which was like the basic Dianetic auditing procedure.
Right.
And he came in to run me through my lines and said, "Okay, well, let's see what are you supposed to say on this line here?" And he gives me the line, and I say, "Well, um, scan through to the end of the incident and tell me when you're there." Well, he said, no, wait a minute. It's you're supposed to say scan through to the end of that, or move through to the end of that incident. Where did you get this? And I said, well, every auditor in the world says scan through to the end of the incident. And he says, well, that's not what it says here in the script. And I said, yeah, I know, but every auditor says it this way. We don't want to put something out that's going to confuse people. So right then and there, he sends up a messenger to the qualifications division to bring down one of the packs of the Dianetics pack.
Right.
He looks it open, he flips it open, he says, well, at the time, it was a board technical bulletin, which was red on cream paper, and it wasn't an official HCOB.
That was something other than L. Ron Hubbard put out, but using his guidance, right?
Yeah, exactly. So he says, hey, I didn't write this bulletin. And that was the beginning of what he then termed New Era Dianetics, meaning that was the procedure that came to, like these commands that he had in the film, how you ended up, doing that procedure. So that was the advent of New Era Dianetics.
So then there was some actually historical things that happened in Scientology anyway, because of these technical films.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, is there anything else you can tell us about it that's kind of memorable to you?
Yeah, well, later on, he embarked on a huge evolution to get people to do their TRs and to do their TRs correctly. Like later in the year, he developed something called Superpower, and he called in students from all over the world to the place where we were now living at WHQ, and he called them in, but they couldn't do TRs properly. So that involved a whole nother evolution of trying to teach people to do TRs, and that involved what became known as the Key to Life course and the Life Orientation course, and then so later on, that next fall, I think, which is 1979, he ended up adding a bunch of shots to the film when he had developed clay table processing on TRs. So we had to do a bunch more shots. And at the time, I was doing a mission in Clearwater to get people to pass their TRs and so on. But so I had to come back, and then we had to do these additional shots on the film. So eventually, the film finally got done and was released. Actually, not till 1984. But there was many other technical films that were done. There was films on the tone scale and how the e-meter works, and the auditor's code, and all different kinds of things. And there's one film that they shot called Man the Unfathomable, and this was shot in the summer of 1978. Like he was banging out his full concentration for basically that first year was just tech films.
Right.
The whole concentration was on tech films, and one of these films was called Man the Unfathomable, and it was supposed to be sort of a general public film to indicate to people how man had sort of progressed. And it starts out with a caveman sequence where someone falls from the tree and breaks their arm, and then the caveman, which is played by me, is drumming and trying to get the guy to recover from that. And the very last sequence is the psychiatrist, also played by me. And this psychiatrist is crazy, and he actually fries a young girl on a electric shock machine and so on. It's completely over the top, as many of LRH's films were completely over the top.
No.
But so eventually all these films got made, and now what interesting, after I escaped in 2000, and right at the end of 2003, LRH or David Miscavige ended up reshooting that entire tech film using non-Scientology actors, so there could be no uh, no no uh, no accusations that, oh well, these are not no one else is going to escape Scientology from this thing, because one of the guys in the film was a guy named Jerry Armstrong, and when he blew in 1981 or 82, he was taken out of the film by reshooting his sequences. They just sort of cut him out of the film. But when I left, they couldn't just kind of shoot around me, so they ended up reshooting the whole film using non-Scientology actors.
Now, just imagine.
Yeah.
All of this, all of that time and money spent and effort to promote something that built into the DNA was failure itself, because
Yep.
right from the very beginning, there were policies on operating that if anybody says anything bad about you or they go against your teachings, they would be declared fair game and you'd go after them. They'd lose their family, like I did,
Yep.
like me losing my two daughters, my grandchildren. I'm still in communication with my son Ronnie and Jenna, my granddaughter, his daughter. But all this time and effort into this. Yet, if Scientology had been promoted simply as a self-help group to teach you correct communication, delivering products that at the end of getting the course, you would get something, not like you're going to go exterior with full perception and you can go
Exactly.
to the moon and undelivered, promises never been delivered. I was involved in Scientology for 42 years, never met one person who had gone exterior with full perception that could demonstrate it. In other words, read a newspaper in the next room and
Yeah.
him sitting in the room. So all of this, yet
Yeah, you're right. It could have been it could have been probably the most successful self-help movement, because so many of the basic principles
yeah,
make sense. How to
yeah,
live a more positive life, how to change conditions in your life, how to use various tools to improve the conditions of your life. It's just it's really sad how LRH, with his toxic organizational policies, and David Miscavige, who's taken it to much worse levels than LRH even envisioned could have taken it. And it's like yeah, it's sad. It's sad. Although we have to agree on one thing. David Miscavige made things so bad that we had no other option than but to escape, and our lives are fantastic now.
I mean, could you imagine that? Because of that, I'm here.
Yeah,
Because of my life being totally unlivable, finally I said to Becky, listen, we're getting the hell out of here. And we planned our escape. And I'm
yeah,
sure you felt the same way. You escaped on a bicycle, right?
yep, exactly.
Yeah.
I
And
left. We had we had 2 hours to do Christmas shopping. This was like 3 days before Christmas, and I just got on my bicycle and rode off and never looked back.
yeah. And how's your life now?
It couldn't be better.
Hey,
So,
wait, before we end this, look at, I called Dan earlier and he showed me a picture that he drew. Dan, please, if that's handy, could you just hold
yeah,
this
yeah,
up and
sure.
show it to the audience? Because Dan is an artist. I'm not talking about just an artist and being able to write good, but actually a painter. And he painted this thing. Show it. I thought it was great.
Can
Bring
you
it back a little bit. Back it up so we get the full. A
can you
little
see that?
further.
Okay.
Yeah, a little further, Dan. Back it off a little further. There you go. Look at that.
Okay. This is entitled "Mother Nature and Mother Earth Dancing with God and Satan," and
Bring
I
it
had a lot
down.
of fun doing this.
Bring it down a little bit. No, down, not up. Lower it. Lower it so we can see the top of the painting, Dan. You're going the opposite direction, buddy. Do
Can
the
you see it?
opposite. There you go. Go in that direction further, so I can see. There you go. There you go. All right. Okay, that was it. And I was so impressed with this because he drew this. That's not
Well, I
something
painted
that.
it, actually.
Well, yeah. Okay, you painted it. Sorry, I used the wrong words there. All right. Yeah. So you can put that there on the side and get back in your screen.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So this has been great. I'm glad we got together on this today because I hope you who viewed this get the point of this, that all the time and effort that's gone into promoting Scientology, and as Dan just pointed out, if they had changed their operating basis and delivered products that could actually be delivered, it may have been one of the best self-help groups. But with the toxic, and I say toxic to be very gracious, they're horrific uh, organizational policies they use. Many people can't tolerate it, but they're gutting it out. And I think some of the people at the international base are just hanging on until they die. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. You guys like Ray Midoff and Norman Starkey and Mark Yeager and Mark Ingber, all these guys. I mean, Lyman Spurlock passed away a number of years ago, so he's gone. But yeah, these people. I mean, Waldo, my twin on this making this film, Waldo is still there, and he's like the same age as me. I'm 72 now, so he's probably getting up there. I have a lot of friends that are still there, and it breaks my heart that I can't be in touch with them.
That was the good thing about Scientology. You formed friendships that, and I feel the same way. I think, man, if I could only get through to some of my buddies there and say, hey, listen, wake up for Christ's sake, man. You're living a life of lies,
But a lot of people escaped. A lot of people, there was a huge exodus around 2004, 2005, and so on. And a lot of those people I'm still very close friends with. And they're fantastic people, and they're probably some of the best people I've ever known in my entire life.
Yeah, I agree. Well, look, I think we made our point today, Dan. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. If you ever have a new invention where you can print money that looks real, call me and we'll talk about that and we'll sell that, right? Now, I hope people
maybe
I'll
only become an engraver,
that's true.
Prison counterfeit money.
Now, you people out there who are serious, we're joking, okay? These days, a lot of things that are done as a joke. People say, well, he said this to me, All right. Yeah. So, okay. So look at, just to do a little business before we end off. If you are not a subscriber, please do so. And I think you're going to get a good education on life and, many things to avoid, which basically is the Church of Scientology. And maybe people who are on the edge looking at this, just walk away. And if you want to help, you can become a Patreon. Just go to my website. Also, I do other things. I do life lessons. I do story time. So you can enjoy those too. Anyway, from me and Dan, I hope you enjoyed this. And we'll see you on the next one. So, Dan, great having you on.
Thanks for having me on, Ron. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, buddy. And all of you out there, I'm Ron Miscavige. This is Life After Scientology. I will see you on the next episode. Bye-bye now.